Barbara, Drew, Katie, your father would be very proud today. Kate, JP, Karen, and our great Chief Judge, and all friends and colleagues and family. Andrew John Zambelli was born September 1st, 1948, but everyone called him Drew. Drew was a genius, as you've heard. And that's not just a rhetorical flourish. He just had more brain power than your average, normal, smart person. Genetics is a powerful force, and obviously Drew inherited great genes from his parents, who you heard about, working-class Italian Americans from the south side of Mount Vernon. The south side is relevant and descriptive, as south side normally is. South side of Mount Vernon was a working-class, poor people's neighborhood, struggling neighborhood, where you relied on each other and you relied on community. But Drew lifted himself up. He had a master's and PhD in psychology and was a neurobiologist doing postdoctoral work as a fellow at Columbia University. Not your usual credentials for governmental or political service. I think we can all agree with that. But then again, Drew was in no way your normal political or governmental service figure. He was a cut above the rest of us. I first met Drew in 1982 when Mario Cuomo was first elected governor and Aldo Bello was elected lieutenant governor. The pairing was the result of New York's crazy law whereby the governor and the lieutenant governor run separately, a law we still haven't changed. Criticism of me. My father had run against Ed Koch and he won. Aldo Bello had run against Carl McCall and he won. So the Cuomo Del Bello shotgun ticket was formed. It was the ticket of many vowels. Now my father is referred to by his friend and Westchester icon Bill O'Shaughnessy as the sainted Mario Cuomo. My father was not really a saint. He came very close. But when he was young, he had a bit of a temper. I would say he could hold a grudge, but the anti-Italian types at the New York Times would use that to fuel their flawed stereotype of Italian Americans. In any event, my father had been offended by things Aldo Bello had said during the campaign, and he refused to have any deep, meaningful conversation with the new lieutenant governor. Deep, meaningful conversation included terms such as, "Hello, how are you?" Drew was the chief of staff to the lieutenant governor, and he would come to me periodically on my office on the second floor and try to resolve this minor operational difficulty. Periodically, defined as a couple of times a week. Despite this awkward situation, Drew's brilliance and charm was on display from the start. He was too smart to ever offer a simple answer. He needed to mention every nuance, footnote, and caveat. Drew was not just brilliant, he was obsessively analytical. He would debate and debate and debate with ever-increasing depth, making sure all the fine points that needed to be taken into consideration were taken into consideration. Every factor needed to be included. You could almost see the two lobes in Drew's brain going back and forth like a ping pong ball in a championship match, both players standing far from the table as the ball travels with blinding speed. My father used to say that Drew's mind processed faster than he could verbalize, like a high-speed computer that couldn't flash the data on the screen quickly enough. Drew knew his mind moved at hyperspeed, so he would often compensate and slow down and repeat himself for normal human beings like myself. It was his own version of Drew for Dummies. "So what do you do?" I asked when I first met Drew. "Well, I'm chief of staff to Aldo Bello, but really I'm a trained neurobiologist. Now, Drew was easy to provoke and always easy to rise to the bait. Neurobiologists, I asked dryly. What's that? You know, brain research. You know, synapses and nerve firings and electric impulses. I researched that. On human brains, I asked. Well, yeah, because you want to know about humans. That's the point, right? Knowing about humans. What else? But no, on monkeys, because they're like humans, basically, and it's easier to get their brains. Does the monkey get the brain back, I asked. Usually, he answered, but not always, really, sometimes. But sometimes when it gets the brain back, it's a little different than the brain was. Do you still have to cut open a skull, and do you use a saw, I asked. Well, how else would you get to the brain? You have to get through the skull, right? But no, we don't call it a saw, but it's like a saw. But it's not really a saw because it's circular. I guess you could call it a circular saw, but not what you think of when you think of circular saw, not something you have in your garage. It doesn't cut wood, it's small. It's a medical saw. And the monkey's brain, is it the same as the human brain? Well, yes, but no. In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no. It depends on what you're researching. And so it started, a great friendship and brotherhood for 36 years. The work to repair the governor and lieutenant governor's relationship went on for months. Drew would offer his psychoanalysis of the situation with excruciating detail from all levels, the political, the governmental, the Freudian, the cultural. How the lack of harmony was bad for both of them. However, we made little actual progress. I would offer Drew the same refrain, that time heals all, and that I sensed a warming in my father. He knew I was just buying time. One day he came into my office, reviewed the situation once again, pacing back and forth, constantly parting his hair with his hands as he did, playing with his mustache as he did, but then basically collapsed into the couch and said with his half cackle, half giggle, "We're never going to work this out, are we?" That was the obvious conclusion from the start. But Drew was too logical to accept an irrational conclusion, especially on such an important measure. The lieutenant governor resigned to take over what my father called was a garbage company, which was actually a large recycling company. But Drew stayed on. Everyone loved Drew. You had to love Drew, even when he worked for the lieutenant governor. He stayed on with my father for the full 12 years, working with my father every day of those 12 years, and I mean literally every day. Drew's first love and priority was always his family. They were always top of mind. Every conversation started there. Barbara, the judge, as she would become called, was the love of his life, and he would often say that. He also had a deep fear of ever disappointing the judge, and he would say that too. He loved Drew and Katie, now a CPA at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and would boast about them in his modest, scientific way. My father and Drew had a special love and bond. My father adored Drew, and Drew adored my father. And Drew was no pushover. He would debate and argue with my father when they disagreed, and they would get hot, and they would get red-faced, and hands would be flailing in sighs of exasperation, like two bulls in an arena. Frankly, I think they enjoyed their own drama of it. My father had a favorite line that he would use that would signal the debate was coming to an end and would stymie Drew every time. My father would say, "Drew, on this hand, on the other hand, but on the other hand, but on this hand, you only have two hands, Drew. You can't have more than two hands." And they would smile. But for Drew, there were more than two hands. He was that smart. Drew was very easy to tease. I enjoyed tossing out a confounding premise just to see how he would attack it, much the way one might throw a large piece of meat into a lion's cage to see how he would go about attacking it. Drew would get most animated when the subject was about his children. At one point, his son Drew was moving to Russia to teach. This situation had Drew very concerned for weeks. So I said to Drew, to add fuel to the fire, you know what's going to happen. Your son is going to go to Russia. He's going to fall in love with a Russian girl. She's not going to be able to come back to the United States because of our immigration laws. And then your son might have to spend the rest of his life in Russia, and you will never see him again. The query overloaded even Drew's computer. He could figure it out. The woman could seek asylum. Maybe he could smuggle her in. Maybe Drew and Barbara would have to move to Russia. But how did we know for sure that he was going to fall in love? Maybe it was just an infatuation. Maybe we could talk him out of it. Maybe they would break up. Maybe he wouldn't even like Russian girls. Maybe Russian girls wouldn't like him. But the idea of being separated from his son, he could just not compute. The same was true when Katie was born prematurely and Drew reviewed the doctor's actions and second-guessed every decision they made, partly because Drew was brilliant, partly because he was a neurobiologist who had studied many monkey brains, which were, although different, they were similar to human brains, but mostly out of a deep and profound love. Drew played every position in government and was the best at everything that he did. He eventually served as secretary to my father, which is the top position in government. And it was a hard job, always, especially working for my father, because although a sainted man, he didn't really like the back and forth bartering negotiations with legislators, and he had little patience for the commissioners' bureaucracies, and he only wanted to talk to the press when he could tell them how uninformed, biased, miserable, or ignorant they were. So a lot fell to Drew. He did everything. He was superb at policy, politics, economics. He could manage, charm, cajole, and confront. There was nothing of consequence that my father did in his 12 years or that I have done in my 8 years when Drew wasn't an essential part. My father must have asked me 1,000 times on a myriad of issues, what does Drew think? But his greatest asset was that everybody respected him on every level on both sides of the aisle. And as sharp as Drew's mind was as big as his heart. He had a fundamental sweetness to him. He was kind and he was empathetic. My family loved him, the senior staff loved him and relied on him. Drew was everyone's friend, mentor, coach, counselor. The young people all sought his guidance. The old-timers all trusted his judgment and his character. Drew was the best model of why a person is in government for the right reasons. He only wanted to do good things. It was never about him. He was as close to without ego as I've ever seen. He was selfless. He never said no, and he gave so much more than he got. He never asked for anything for himself. He wanted to make the world a better place, and helping the Democratic Party and Nita Lowey and George Latimer and Noam Branson and Janet DiFiore and Al Del Bello and Mario Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo was the best way of using his talents to do that. One of his greatest professional pains was my father's loss in 1994. We both blamed ourselves to a great extent, and we would talk about it afterwards. The vagaries of politics and how timing and circumstances and personal agendas can overwhelm merit and fact. The isolation of being in power and subjected to the barbs of the nasty, the naysayers, and the anonymous. Drew particularly bristled at the unfair criticism that my father hadn't accomplished enough during his term. Drew took that personally and would fly into a rage and start reciting accomplishments rapid fire with dates and specifics. His quantitative scientific mind was never comfortable with the ignorance so present in politics. And Drew knew me in ways I didn't know myself. One day after a discussion on the nearing completion of the new Tappan Zee Bridge, he called me up and we talked about how spectacular an accomplishment the new bridge would be. And he said, I know what you're going to do. You're going to name the new bridge. And then he did that little nervous giggle laugh where he would cover his mouth because he was embarrassed that he was giggling, which he was. He said, you're going to name it the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge. Now, this is before I had any conversation about a naming with anyone, including myself. But Drew was excited. Oh, your father would hate that, he said. He would so hate it. And he giggled again. He would be so against it, Drew said. But Drew was enthused. The way he would get enthused when we were young and we would be doing something behind my father's back while he was governor, something that we thought was the right thing, but my father would hate, and how he would kill us if he ever found out about it. But we would do it anyway. I said, so what do you think, Drew? And as usual, he played a couple of ping pong rounds with the different lobes of his brain, on this hand, on that hand, on the other hand. But then he stopped. And emotion overwhelmed facts, which was a rare happening for Drew. And he said, I love it. I really, really love it. For us, it was a closure, a great punctuation point to my father's 1994 loss. The largest infrastructure project in the United States of America, $4 billion project, on time and on budget, and it lives. Reaching for the heavens, beautiful, with Mario Cuomo's name on it. The haters and the naysayers cannot deny it, although they always try. That is their nature, but it will stand for all time. Mario Cuomo wins. A testament to possibility wins. And Drew Zambelli and Andrew Cuomo and his good team made it happen. People will say that Drew did polling. That analysis is superficial. Yes, he did polling, but we didn't do polling the way people think of polling. We didn't poll to determine what to do because popular opinion, frankly, was not all that relevant a factor in what we did. My father's credo taught us a higher standard. Our code was we did the right thing no matter what. We fought the good fight, popular or unpopular, easy or hard. Vetoing the death penalty every year for my father was not politically smart, but it was the right thing to do. Passing gun safety was not politically smart for me, but it was the right thing to do. Drew and I would work on the polls together, more as our own joint personal therapy session. Drew's mind, and mine to a lesser degree, pursued the quantitative analysis because it was logical and fact-based, a relief to the Albany political world we dealt with day in and day out, filled with small-mindedness and pettiness and futility. So many important things to do, and so many unnecessary obstacles, none of which made sense. The polling provided numbers, and there was an oasis of clarity and fact in numbers. The polling was our way of creating an antidote to the insanity of the politics, to find logic within the irrationality, to have a discussion just between us and to focus on the truth, find our bearings, chart our course, and find peace. 17 days ago, Drew was doing everything else he was doing and also helping me with my campaign. Involved in every aspect. His great mind, experience, wisdom, and humor were a great boost of support to me and to the entire team. And the next day he was gone. The shock of the phone call is still with me. 11 days before Election Day. So why does God take such a good man so young? Why do we lose such a talent at such a critical time? When the world seems to be coming apart at the seams and government is in chaos, why does God take Drew? Why take him from Barbara, his love, his cherished Katie and Drew so early? With such negativity in the world, why take one of the few powerful positives? And why didn't we have more warning? Why didn't we have a chance to say goodbye? Why didn't we have 11 more days until the election day so I could say, Drew, we won the race, 3.4 million votes, more than any governor in history. And we won the big race, the race of life, 20 years of government service. We fought the good fight and we won. We helped people. We made this place a better place. And we have a proud, lasting legacy. And none of it would have happened without you, Drew. Why didn't we have a chance to say one more time, I thank you, I love you, I respect you, I admire you. You have been a gift in my life, and you are a star in our world, and your light will never dim. Why, God, why? Why did you do this? It makes no sense. There is no logic. I can't figure it out. Let me get Drew, and maybe we'll do a poll. Thank you. Thank you.